Thank you for joining us for the media panel. Well, there's a lot of media out there, he says, wide-eyed and innocently. What I'd like everyone who's up there, starting from my left to the right, is simply give your name and what media you can be found in. Start with your kid.
All right. Hi, I'm Kid O'Toole, and I'm in print media, but I also am a podcaster and a videocaster.
Next.
I'm Rob Leonard, and if everyone's taking this, make sure I get a copy. I host Beatles songs every Friday, 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on 90.3 WHBC. Streaming at nccradio.org, been doing it for 30 years. I also do a podcast, though I call it a talk show on the internet, called the Fab Four Free For All. And that's basically it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but are you recording this session right now?
Well, some of it. I got over there, but I see other people doing it.
Okay, so just be aware that this is going out into the wide world.
Maybe, I don't know. It depends on the quality.
Someday. But I believe we're actually streaming live on the Fest channel right now. So, okay, that rumor has it. Continue.
Hello, I'm Joe Mayo. I have a channel called Mean Mr. Mayo. I've been doing it for about 11 years now, and I also do a show called Talk More Talk, with also on YouTube. Both of these are YouTube, so I've been on YouTube for a long time.
Okay, next.
Hi everybody, my name is Andy Nichols, and I'm the co-host of a Paul McCartney solo podcast, videocast called Two Legs, that I do with my partner Tom Hanyadi, and it's on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you. Go, next.
Oh, it's my turn already?
Yeah, it's your turn already.
I'm Ethan Alexanian. I host a, surprise, surprise, Beatles podcast called Fans on the Run.
Thank you. Next. Oh, we have to. We do have another microphone here. Sure. Yep.
I have to sit up for this one. Lovely. Hello. My name is Skylar Moody. I'm a Beatles content creator on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and I also have my own podcast dedicated to George Harrison, and it's called Apple Scruffs.
Thank you.
I'm going to hang myself here. I'm Darren DeVivo from WFUV Radio in New York City, 90.7 FM, and also, is there a wind down that end of the table here? 90.7 FM and WFUV.org, and I've been at FUV for 39 years on the air, and right now can be heard 10 p.m. Monday through Thursday nights till 2 a.m. and Saturday afternoons 1 to 4 at WFUV, and I co-host the podcast Things We Said Today. It's me, it's Alan Kozin, it's Ken Michaels. Every other week, we have some fun talking everything about the Beatles.
Thank you very much. Now, there's and by the way, as we go through this, you may not be at the table, but if you have some questions that you would like to put to this panel, please be ready with them, because one of my points here is, you have a question?
Yeah. Beatles Media.
One of the questions I was going to put to this panel to start with is, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 2 years ago maybe not, if the question came up talking about media, the word podcast would not necessarily have been the first words coming out of somebody's mouth, and yet that is almost the assumption as you go across it. Somewhere in your repertoire is a podcast or streaming or something like that. We will get to that in a moment, but right now, as part of the Fest for Beatles fans, I would like you to, I'm going to try not to have tick, 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 but the first one, and then you guys can jump in and out, is if I were a civilian and I define civilian as someone who's not at the fest for Beatles fans, someone who's heard about this group over the years. What is the image of the Beatles at this point out in the mainstream world? Who are the Beatles? Are they a slice of history? Are they still an active concern? Are they somebody you go see when you're in Las Vegas at the Mirage? Who are the Beatles? So, you want to start us?
I'd actually say all of the above.
I'm going to, as a good taskmaster, say, well, choose one or two of the above.
Okay. I'd say for some, a slice of history, but some, the most exciting band to ever exist.
And still are?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody want to jump forward?
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm going to take the history side because one thing that's happened to the Beatles, in the mainstream, a new record comes out, a box set, people react to articles written in paper, or and maybe more on the internet now. But at the same time, on radio, classic hit stations don't play it. Classic rock plays some Beatles, but they don't play any solo music for the most part. At the same time, we're about to hit the 60th anniversary of the arrival in America, and after 60 years, if you look at the history, if you look at like World War II, they had 50 years, and it was a big celebration, but when they got to the 60th, a lot of people would pass, they don't have the first-hand stories, and we're getting to that point with the Beatles, where it's getting to be history almost only. I mean, we love the music, and we're always going to love the music, but it's becoming history, where kids can say, oh, gee whiz, they arrived at Kennedy? What was that? Why did we care?
Why did they care?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the thing. It's just, it's fading away. It's still there, but it's fading at the same time. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but history, once you start writing history, there's certain different angles that pop up at the same time.
And to use your Second World War comparison, the First World War commemorations are just off the chart. They're not there, unless you're in Europe or Great Britain.
Right.
Can you? Yes.
And Canada.
Okay.
We still take World War I very seriously.
Okay. I stand corrected. But picking up on this, so who are the Beatles? What are they in our consciousness, in the general public's consciousness? We know who they are in our consciousness. So I thought you have a good point. It's history. So riff on that. Are they history, or are they history and more?
I think history and more, because the music is, history, World War II, those things happened. They were huge, historic events in our country, but that was an event, it was horrible, it was a war. Music is forever, right?
It's not, though, because a new generation might not connect to it the way they connect to Katy Perry.
I'd like to speak on behalf of the new generation and say, excuse me, I'd like to speak on behalf of the new generation and say there is an entire community of fans out there across multiple social media platforms that will continue to
Are they being played on Z100?
No, but does that matter?
What is Z100?
No. It's the top station in New York City and the country.
But radio is not the same as it was.
No, it's not, but it still matters.
They don't have to be played on the top stations to be recognized as one of the most influential bands in the
We're
world.
not talking about that. We're talking about the new generation coming in and saying, oh, that's my father's music or my mother's music.
And now it's our music.
Why do you have two people in their 20s sitting on the couch?
I don't know. You set it up.
Because they are the next generation of fans.
If I may jump
They're doing a
in.
good job speaking for themselves. So, go ahead, and then there's still a couple people haven't spoken on this question, but go ahead.
If I may say so, the Beatles have about as much cultural relevance as radio currently does.
Agreed.
Did you want to jump in?
Yes.
Well, then please.
I have had my eyes opened here at the fest, a little less so this year, because I know about last year, the panel we had a year ago, with Skylar leading the way, when it then became obvious to me, my goodness, this band's never going to fade away. And I don't know what it is exactly. The experts can come up with the reasoning why, and the timing, and the 60s, and the era, and the music, why it's happening. We're seeing the new wave in what the Beatles are, their history, but their current as well. And in a lot of the music that I play at FUV, which is mostly all new artists now, the transition is pretty much complete, that when I do play a Beatles song, it's unusual on WFUV, but I hear it in all of these new artists coming out. My goodness, it's the Beatles I'm hearing. The next generation, what is it now? Z? What are they? Z. See, I realize every day as all of this goes on, I realize, boy, I'm getting older. I'm having trouble keeping up with everything.
You're older, but just as handsome as ever.
Oh, thank you.
Kid, I see you ready to jump in.
I'm ready. I see the Beatles as sort of, almost still in evolution, if that makes sense. Ken Womack in the audience and I co-edited a book called The Beatles, Fandom and the Beatles, available at all fine bookstores everywhere. And
bookstores?
Well, what are those? I guess I should say that. No, but a thread that went through our book is how fandom has changed over time, from original fans to today and younger fans, and it's changed, but it has changed just in the way of technology and the way that it has become more of a participatory kind of thing, that it's not just listening to the music anymore, it's creating your own, participating in it in terms of reading podcasts, going on TikTok. I think we've all become more fans, and we're participating in it and contributing to the knowledge about the band. It's become, I'm trying to think of how to describe it, but kind of a living history, the band. So it's ever growing. It hasn't remained static, and I think that the band, the fandom, is just going to continue to grow as the generations go on.
I think
you wanted to say
yeah,
something?
I just think that this time, at this place that we're in at this time, it's just that radio, unfortunately, isn't as important as far as getting the Beatles known to newer generations. And it's online a lot. It's social media. And things like YouTube channels and TikTok, things like that. That's how young people are really connected with it. I wish that there was more on commercial radio, as I remember it constantly being played a lot. But I know in my area they're cutting down big time on Beatles, even on regular radio stations. You have the same one or two songs come together, hello, goodbye. Yeah. That's it.
Let it be.
I like your choice of words, though, when you gave the examples of how people listen. But you're saying, I wish radio was like it used to be. No,
that's fine.
But what I'm saying is, those other lists that you've given, you have just defined contemporary radio. It would be like talking to someone in the 1920s, 1930s. None of you were there. I wasn't there either. But in the 1920s and 30s, they had a particular articulation of what radio was, handful of channels throughout the country, and then you had, oh look, there's FM. Oh, we've now doubled the number of channels. Oh, look, there are some other sub-channels. So even the very concept of what we would call traditional mainstream radio has evolved over the years. And you talked about thoughts that a year ago, 2 years ago, made you kind of, oh, hello, something's different. And I teach a course called Future TV at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And we put to the question of radio equals podcasts, etc. That is radio. Whether there's something that comes over the air that I listen to streaming, or I listen to in my car, or listen to from this box, all of the above indeed is radio. So when there's a lament for one particular way of accessing audio, but that doesn't mean interest in accessing audio has dropped. In fact, I think it's accelerated, if I may.
Well, one of the problems with radio and podcasts is a great example, Odyssey, it's a radio company. Right now their stock is 13 cents a share.
Yes.
Now, one of the things they just put out in their public record, the stock holder thing, is that we're doing a lot of podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say they're making any money from it.
And as a matter of fact, that is one of the hot stories in media coverage, variety, etc. And it's not just limited to audio. It's streaming in general. We had, making up this number, we have 1,000 new series coming on in peak TV. Streaming 5 episodes, 10 episodes, whatever. And this is the year that the hard wall of reality has hit a number of companies saying, we can't do this anymore. We need to have some established stream of revenue. So now we come back to pardon me for putting on the historians, how did radio start? People who weren't getting paid anything were sending out signals. And the idea of being paid for doing a cast was a major jump. And then the fact that you can be paid a lot of money, and then you can be paid a tremendous amount of money, had everything to do with the limited avenues of audio. Or in the case of TV, limited avenues of TV, video, where we got 4 channels. We have a limited number of radio stations. So we are the gatekeepers. And so therefore, that's how we make the money. You want to hear whatever it is, you got to go through our gate, and our gate usually was advertising. What you all have described, especially talking about your friends, the great circles of interest in Beatles, you are not generating the level of finance that an ABC would in their heyday. They're still generating money, but anybody who's doing from the ground up isn't. So now we come back to, why do you do audio radio? If you do it for love, that's great. But if you're doing it to make ends meet, is that even possible these days? Anybody jump in?
If I may.
Yeah.
Well, I have a YouTube channel. I started 11 years ago. I mean, it's always for the fun first, and no matter what, that's what it's all about. Now, I've seen some discussions, and sometimes people say, well, I'm not in for the money, I don't care. After being on a while, it got to the point where I was able to make a few bucks. And when I say few, I mean few. I can't live off it. But if a new McCartney archive comes out, maybe you save a couple of bucks, maybe you can get that. But at first I was, I'm not going to ever do that. It took me a while to monetize, say, right? But I do that. I don't know if that's where we're going with it, but I just thought from a past discussion I'd seen on this that, and why not, At first you feel funny, I shouldn't do that, I'm just doing it for a good time. Why not have your cake and eat it too?
Sure.
And if it stopped tomorrow, I wouldn't change a thing. I keep going just as I'm going.
Because you're getting a satisfaction from
meeting people here at the fest, people coming up to me saying, they enjoy it, they like to watch what I do, and it makes me feel good, and it's a good thing.
I'm going to ask about subsidies in a moment, but anybody else want to jump in about fun or finance?
Obviously, like Joe said, it's all about the fun. That's what you're doing it for. But honestly, the best compensation of all is the commentary that you get from the people who are watching or listening to your content when they're saying, I love what you're doing. What you said is so right. This is exactly what I was thinking. When you get that confirmation from others that they love what you do, I feel like that's something that money could never replace.
Agreed.
Or can't replace immediately. I mean, are you also doing it for the long run? No Eagles reference intended.
In my case, it's everything you're pointing out, it started out, WFUV once upon a time was a college station at Fordham University. Still is, broadcasting from Fordham and owned by Fordham, but without getting into we're not really a college station any longer. But I went to Fordham University because of, well, it helped it was 2 miles from where I lived, but they also had a big station that had coverage. Most colleges have small stations, they don't have much coverage, sometimes they just broadcast to the campus. But I knew FUV was Long Island, Connecticut, up Westchester to Rockland, Northern Jersey. But I wanted to go on FUV, so I went to Fordham. And I'm very fortunate that the planets aligned several times during my career, where, you know, it was literally like The Godfather Part 3. Just when I thought I was leaving, it pulled me back in. And next thing I know, it was now my job and my career. And now unfortunately, it's become a little bit more for the money. I hate to say that, because it was fun for so many years, and it still is, but it's a different kind of fun now, and now it's putting food on the table as well.
And by the way, you win first Godfather 3 illusion in this panel. I saw a couple of ready to, did you want to?
I'll go. To me, I don't make money doing my radio show. I don't think we've made any money with the podcast. There is recognition from both. Skylar said it's nice to see when someone says, hey, we like what you're doing, or I agree with you, or sometimes better, I hate what you do, and you guys are a bunch of assholes. Well, it's true, we do sometimes get that. But I've always believed, you know, I don't get paid, but I'm always going to treat it as a professional thing. I don't say, well, I don't feel like doing my show this week because I'm going to the bar with my friends. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to do my show, tape it beforehand. You gotta look at it as, you know, you're on Q104 here in New York, or, you know, whatever the station is in Chicago. So you got to look like you're doing it for everyone. You know, the Beatles, you know, the podcasting, and all podcasting from many, especially the Beatles stuff, it gets lower. We have a certain number we reach every week. It's not bad, but it's, you know, it's not, you know, Casey Kasem at his peak or something like that.
Footnote for history, Casey Kasem was the host of a top 40 Billboard chart review show that played each week and counted down the top 40.
America's Top 40.
Yep.
Yes, go, please.
Yeah, I think FM radio was a great thing at one time, and I think you can look at, you know, but it's changed so much now. You look at people creating all this stuff. Look at what radio is now. You're hearing the same recycled songs all the time. Freeform radio in the early 70s, when the DJs could play what they want. Those were the glory days. Those were the glory days. They're gone.
And I'm going to get to alternatives in just half a second. That historically, just remember that FM was a reaction to AM.
Yeah.
Then AM says FM took all of the music shows. We're going to do talk. We can discuss what that led to. But instead we'll just say AM is perfectly suited for talk. Okay, we've got music here, talk here. Now this thing comes along that goes directly to everybody's pocket if they wish, or their own computer screen. Howsoever they're reaching this streaming world, you could look at it as the next step. And I'll tell you, there weren't a lot of ads in the early FM broadcasts. And until someone like on AM, as AM was looking and saying, what are we going to do now? And then the talk radio phenomenon took out. Even then, there was a little veil that it was hiding behind. The famous Rush Limbaugh, it was a barter show.
Right.
They didn't have to pay for it. The stations that carried it, that changed over the years. But for the most part, it was, we just want the commercials, so here, you get this programming for free. So the idea of, podcasters or people on streaming are not making a lot of money, that's not necessarily fresh challenges. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the problems that the podcaster has, if you go to Coca-Cola and say, hey, we get 10,000 hits a week, they'll say, okay, who cares? If you go to the local supermarket. We get 10,000 hits a week. Oh, is it all in Nassau County? No, we have people listening in Europe. We have people listening in California. Well, my store is in Nassau County. So why do I care that we get 10,000 hits? My advertising doesn't go where I need to go. And that's one of the problems with podcasting and the numbers, because like I said, the Cokes don't care, and the supermarkets, it's not narrow enough.
So do we need to redefine what is of value?
For me, the value in doing my podcast, and I think I said it last year, and I'll reiterate it. I'm just doing this out of love. I don't expect to ever make any money from it. I could. That would be beneficial, but I'm doing this because I love it. And once I stop loving it, I'll stop doing it.
Which is actually not that unusual in the history of people plugging themselves into media. If I don't like what I'm doing, I'm going to find something else.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of Talk More Talk, which I co-host with Joe, Tom, who's in the audience there, and Ken Womack is one of our founders. I mean, we started it, we run, when, we have our shows on YouTube, we have, we do run ads, and we, make a little bit from that, mainly just to cover our costs in terms of, the software we use, Zoom and that kind of thing. But I mean, we are definitely not in it to make mega bucks. I can definitely tell you that. But it's basically the same thing. We are in it because we are fans of the solo music, and we want to, get the word out and encourage people to take another listen and look at albums, particularly, albums and music that we think have been overlooked. And you need to look beyond just the Beatles. And that was our mission, and that's what really keeps us going.
Tell me how you gauge success.
It's a number of things, I think.
So we're back to numbers.
Yeah, kind of, in a way. It's, sure, you can judge it in number of views that we get, subscriptions. It's also comments that we get on our videos. And I mean, Joe, you can jump in if I'm missing anything, but it's really, it's a combination of factors. Am I missing?
No, that's it. Yeah, that's it. I don't. Again, on my channel, I just know that you start out small. I've been doing it for a long time now. You get maybe 100 views on a video, and now you could get 1,500, 2,000 or more in maybe half a day or something like that. And you get a feeling how many people are watching it, and that takes it also, of course, all over the globe, which is another thing that, when you do videos on something, social media, something like that. Now, so what I'm doing right here, I've wanted to do this at the fest for many times. I always said, I wish I could be on a panel about something, and here I've been this weekend, and I mean this is all respect. But then you start thinking the way the world is today, you can have 10 people in the audience, 20 watching, 50 people. Well, you make a video and you do something about, like, for example, the marginalizing of John Lennon. I did a video, I feel John's a little, kind of like, dust a little today compared to how he was. Boom, all of a sudden, everybody's watching it from all over. You can get a lot more views than just in a room. However, there's nothing like having real people here.
You mentioned TikTok. When we're starting to kick around numbers, give us some guidance numbers for TikTok. In other words, both as a poster and as a business, as far as you've observed.
In terms of how many views I get?
Well, not just you, but then the industry of TikTok in general.
Well, TikTok in general, to me, I wouldn't say I get too many views. Sometimes I maybe only get like a couple hundred or a couple thousand if I'm lucky. If I'm really lucky, then you're pushing towards maybe like over 10,000, over 15,000. And you're really not making too much money off of TikTok unless you're getting millions of views and have millions of followers. But again, that's that's not what I'm here to do at the moment. Right now, it's all for the love, and I love that very much.
Can you look down the road and say, this is potentially building leverage for underwriting, sponsorship? For example, just this weekend, we saw an original video production done in association with a Beatles channel project, and we'll leave it vague because it's best only at the moment. But what if that turns out to be a jumping off point for other projects, other commissions, etc.? Is that part of a long-term view of what your individual podcast can be? I mean, maybe you're working for a pharmaceutical company in the future. You're working for a finance company in the future. You're working for, okay, I saw it, all right. But you see what I'm saying? In other words, you are building your CV, basically.
Yes.
So, go ahead, yeah.
Part of it is, it's almost like you're, I don't want to say practicing, but like let's say there's a documentary. Like years ago, I got a call from NHK, which is Japanese television network.
Yeah.
And they wanted to do a special on Imagine. And they wanted to have me as one of the talking heads. Now, me being me, I said, well, you know, as much as Imagine's a good song, I really think John Lennon's song is Watching the Wheels, or Give Me Some Truth, or Instant Karma. And they were in my studio, and they started talking Japanese, not knowing what they're saying. Next thing I know, they said, okay, we'll call you, and they left. Now, I probably pissed them off, or I didn't fall into what they wanted to do with their documentary. So, part of doing what we all do is someone else might say, hey, they have talent or know something, maybe they can help us out. The new Mike Douglas, John and Yoko movie, I talked to the producer the other day, because I know her, I used to work with her. And she told me, you know, they have a lot of things in the thing. They have a lot of footage that we've never seen before. And I said, I wish I had known, you were doing this, because, maybe you could have hired me, because I need a job, or any job, and maybe, I could have helped you. But they already finished it, so.
So part of it is getting your brand out, basically. And we've talked about this in past panels, is that you are establishing your brand, and I guarantee you that each of yours approach to the story of the Beatles is a little bit different. You're drawing from different experiences, and you have a different statement that you want to get out there. And so it's really funny how a media panel has changed over the years. Let's make it 10 years ago, would sit there and say, did you see the way that the New York Times covered such and such? Did you see the way ABC television covered? We're talking about something that we, if not own, we do, that we are generating. And whether it's at a over-the-air broadcast station, very traditional, whether it's affiliated with some entity, the Atlantic, New York Times website, where there's an audio component to it, or a video component. We could be affiliated with all that. Could be affiliation with a major university, Ken, etc. You have all of that, and it's more complicated than in the days of 4 major networks and a handful of stations. Now it's you all are declaring this is what we think is important, and that's what media is. That's just my declaration. You can disagree, but I would ask you this. When I talk about I'm listening to the radio, or I'm listening to music, or I'm listening to podcasts, how does one listen? Does one turn on a source of the audio, and there it is flowing in the background? Or is it destination? Is audio today destination, or a general backdrop that you come in and out of? Is that clear? I hope it is.
I think for Beatles especially, whether it's podcast or radio show, people, like my brother is not going to listen to my show because he's not a Beatles fan. Nothing against my brother, he's an alarm fan the way I'm a Beatles fan. So for shows like the podcast we do, you're not going to listen to a podcast unless you like it.
Okay.
There's a step you have to make beyond just the regular receiving of a radio signal. Because with the podcast, you sometimes get notifications, but I used to work at WABC, and they started their own little podcast network. And mind you, this goes everywhere else. But they always say on the air, go to wabcradio.com and click on the podcast. They don't say go to iTunes or
sure.
but that's their thing. And they want people to go to the website. So the thing about podcasting, there's a thing called Podcast One. The guy who started Westwood One in all Paddocks, who's now passed. He started it, and it's all celebrities. And it's a one-stop shopping for all these different celebrities who have talk shows on the internet. And I think sometimes you have to have that attitude, the way you promote your show, or you just can't say, I do a show, or I have a website. Because it has to be more than that to get because to climb over that step to say, oh, I listen to you every week. Okay, thank you. But not everyone knows about all of our shows because, it's just, that's the way it is. I mean, there's tons of Beatles podcasts. I search it all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, when you ask about whether podcasts can be background or destination, I feel like when you find that one podcast that you really want to listen to and you really like, that becomes your destination. It's leading you to your destination because if you find something that you like and you have an interest in a career in media, you can take inspiration from that. You can learn what others are saying and doing, what other people care about, what they want to hear, and you make mental note of that. So as you're heading towards your ultimate goal, you keep that in the back of your head so that you don't exactly copy word for word, but you have ideas about what you can do and what other people might like.
How do you all listen? And this will be sort of across the board. For instance, for me, I'll be honest, if I'm following the Beatles channel, it's usually from my phone. But if I'm in the car, I might not just be listening to the Beatles channel. I'm listening to all the choices that are flowing through the radio, which picks up Sirius as well as FM, as well as AM. So, default, how do you listen to
Well, first of all, something that folks find surprising is I never listen to my radio station because I'm too close to it and I need to, you need to take a step back. I listen, it's the car, it's Sirius XM, it's AM, and less so rock music, again, for the same reason, even though it might be different music than what gets played on WFUV, I need a break. I'll listen to jazz or something, or talk on AM. It's mostly the car. At home, it's almost always background. And it's usually talk, just so that you don't feel like you're walking around the house alone talking to yourself. You have people having conversations. So it's kind of background for me when I'm home. But in the car, that's when I listen. And I know my wife's into a bunch of podcasts, and it's all car listening for her, to pass the time in traffic.
Okay, and actually, I'm going to make this a two-parter, looking at the time. Two-parters, how do you listen? That's my first question. Second is, you have a Beatles identity. What is your Beatles identity as an audio source?
I think I've just basically years and years. Oh, what's my?
Yeah, you're saying I'm Beatles. If you want to hear blank type of Beatles, you come to me for what?
Unfortunately, today, I don't actually have much to add except now the podcast, which was that I co-host. Things we said today. Things have changed in the radio in general. I mean, nothing stays the same.
Right.
And I've gone at WFUV through so many different format changes, some subtle, some obvious. Often artists that we may have played that I've become friendly with 20 years ago might come to me now and say, I got a new record out. You think you could? And I'm like, I have no input anymore. The days of, I think Andy mentioned the freeform radio. Right, I caught the tail end of that growing up in the 70s, but WFUV still kept that going into the 90s. There was nothing better than going on the radio where I could play ELP's Tarkus into Phil Oakes or something crazy like that. And then I watched that even in my circle start drying up and eventually going away. And now I see all of a sudden podcasts, TikTok, podcasts, video casts. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to have to do a little personal reinvention if I want to be able to tap into what I like and what my expertise is, because it's not it's not where I'm at in the traditional format of radio. I've got to start reinventing the wheel right now, and that's where podcasts come into play. YouTube channels. I got to get past though the wall of like, how do you do all this?
Flip over, Scarlett. So 2 questions. What do you listen to? How do you listen? How do you listen is the basic. And then what is your Beatles identity?
How I listen, I mean, like Darren, for me in the house, it's usually just background music. My parents will have the radio on in the living room downstairs, so I'm kind of getting a little bit of whatever talk is going on or whatever music is going on, and I'll hear a bit of that. If I'm in my own room, I usually just have my headphones in and I'll have on background music while I'm writing or if I'm editing or just brainstorming, doing anything like that. And then when I'm in the car, it's definitely more predominant. Like I will have it turned all the way up. I just got music going. I think it might be I'm just anxious with driving, and I feel like that kind of helps relieve it a little bit. The Beatles especially, of course. And then my identity as a Beatles fan, I would say, if you're curious to see how Gen Z views the Beatles, how we're discussing topics about them, what we think about certain songs or albums, or how we think the fandom is going to evolve over time, then you come to me. You look at videos, you look at writing, anything.
Okay.
In the house, there's usually very little music going on outside of my room, where it's, I'm either listening to records or I'm listening to Spotify, or I put on a podcast while I work on school stuff. In the car, since I'm mostly a passenger, I usually just have my headphones on, listening to
your choice.
my playlists, my personal Beatles playlists, or if I'm in the mood for Slade that day. And I feel like my identity my show's identity is, I try and keep it human. Like, it's organic, it's chaotic, it's irreverent. The whole show is just we try to have fun.
Okay. Getting the Beatles as a source of positive entertainment. What do you listen to, or how do you listen, I should say, and then what is your Beatles identity?
How I listen, when I listen, I'm all in. I don't put it on in the background to just leave it on in the background. If I'm home or at work or in the car, if somebody's taken the time to produce a show that I find engaging to listen to, I'm going to listen to it or watch it, whether it's a video cast or it's a traditional podcast. I don't like to, because those people took the time to create content that they feel is engaging enough to be shared with the community. So I'm going to go, I don't like the background thing, I like to be all in with it. That's how I listen to it. In terms of how our identity is, I mean, obviously our goal with Two Legs, producing a weekly show on Paul McCartney's 53-year solo career, encompassing everything that he's done, our goal is to bring some of those aspects of his career and life to people that don't know about it, and say, I didn't know about that. I want to check that out and listen to it. I really like that. And we've had those comments and those reactions from people. That's our ultimate goal with the McCartney podcast, because he's been so prolific that it requires that kind of attention.
It's not just yesterday.
All right, well, for me, when I listen to music, a lot of times it has to be in the car these days. I live in a small apartment. The walls are like tissue paper. There's noises everywhere. Until I move into a bigger place, I got to deal with it that way, but I can play it as loud as I want and stuff. And I listen to very little radio except for oldies. WHLI is one of the oldie stations. But as far as my identity, so to speak, on my channel, which is called Me Mr. Mayo on YouTube, what I do there is basically everything. I mean, there's new items coming out by Beatles-related things, whether group or solo. Talk about the news. I have a show that I do called Fab Gab, which basically has guests on, and we discuss all kinds of Beatles topics. And I do regular content. If you do it more regular enough, then you start getting more people like a favorite program. You know, they want to say, oh, I want the next episode, if you will, or whatever. You get too lax in it, I think people start drifting off on it.
You can't do it, then don't expect me to show up.
So this is, check it out.
What's the question?
The two-part question, how do you listen to audio?
Okay.
And what is your Beatles identity?
How I listen to radio. Usually radio in my car. I listen to CDs. I sometimes will put a stream on the computer. I don't have Sirius XM.
On behalf of Tom Frank Jones, well, you know, we have some deals for you, so
Well,
make sure.
I've had Tom on my show, so
Okay.
it's a once-a-year thing where we go to Vincent's and Carl Place and then we do a show.
Okay, continue.
Vincent's is more important, actually, sometimes. The presentation, I think, for me, is the most important thing of doing a Beatles radio show, because there are people who say, well, why do you play the hits? Well, the Beatles were the #1 act in the 60s, and they're still the #1 act total, though Taylor Swift's very close. Paul McCartney was #1 act in the 70s. If you don't play the hits, and you have to play some of them, then you're actually ignoring, you know, part of the music. Also, if you're going to play something from like Ocean's Kingdom, you better say before you play it, this is Ocean's Kingdom, this is Paul's orchestra music. If you don't like it, it's over in 14 minutes. Come back then.
And we'll be back with Hey Jude.
Yes, but the presentation, I think, is the most important thing if you're doing a Beatles show, because it's easy to fall into the trap of the hardcores, and we're hardcores.
Oh, you are. You definitely are all hardcores.
Just play, you know, stuff that we don't know. And you have, there's several levels of Beatle fan, you know, people who are starting, people who are established, people who are going to get a hardcore, and then the people after that. So that would be my thing. Me, it's about the presentation.
And remember to give John some equal time.
Yes.
And Kit,
Inside joke.
I'm going to let you have the last word on this, and then I'm going to ask if there are any questions from the audience. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, generally, I listen, it kind of depends on whether I'm listening to music or podcasts. But generally, I do have Sirius XM. I mainly listen to that in the car. Sometimes I listen to it through my iPad or computer, stream that. You know, I like to, when I'm writing and or preparing lessons and things like that, I'll listen to, you know, music while I'm doing that. As far as podcasts go, it kind of depends if they're on YouTube or on Spotify, or listen to it through that. Usually through my computer, sometimes through my phone, as you were mentioning. But I do tend to, you know, focus a bit more when I'm listening to those. I'm not writing while doing that. As far as my identity, I guess it's a bit more, and I think you'll agree with me, Wally. I like to kind of dig beneath the surface in my about music. You know, I like to look at what influenced the making of this song. What are their musical influences? What were the lyrics really about? Going through the history and their musical roots. So that's kind of my thing.
Okay, I'm about to thank everybody, but only after we've had a chance to take any questions that might come from you folks. Anybody want to throw a stumper or just a query? Piers, you always bring a different country's perspective, so...
I'm coming at it from the...
Oh, hang on.
Yeah, it's right.
It's a big space.
I'm not super into podcasts, only because I have limited amount of time. But my question for the panel is, what should be the optimal length of a podcast?
Oh, I know.
Very reasonable question. Ethan, you jumped in first, and then I believe Rob, you came to... So what's the optimal length of a podcast?
Anywhere between 10 minutes and 6 hours.
Okay, thank you. All right. Perhaps You want to make it between 8 minutes and 12 hours?
No. My co-host,
That's pretty
Jack
long.
Sarad and Tony Triguardo. Tony and I have radio experience. We think that we do 1 hour, basically 1 hour shows, sometimes an hour 15, but sometimes we record 2 or 3 hours and then we cut it down. And people, some people say, well, I'm traveling and I want to listen to your show for the entire trip, and it's a 3-hour trip. But we don't think that we're that interested for 3 hours. And if we also out of radio, so we think of, syndicated radio shows where they do like interviews. Usually they're an hour, up closes or something like that. So to me, an hour. There are times that you might do more, but if you record 2 or 3, then you cut it down to 2 or 3 seconds.
I'm going to get back to your length of time in a moment.
I think anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour is optimal. We try to do an hour for most of our shows. Sometimes they go a little longer, but I think an hour is a reasonable amount of time to hold the audience's attention, because then we'll start putting our own selves to sleep with our geekness and everything else.
I would do a variant on your range, which is to say, if you have a site of multiple episodes, my plugging into your podcast experience might indeed go for the 3-hour drive, 4-hour drive, a 6-hour period. But any one show or one presentation, I would lean more towards the 40 minutes to
an hour.
Yeah.
Personally, from a recording or from a listening perspective, I think half an hour to an hour is probably optimal. But then if you ask anyone, everyone's going to give you a different answer.
Oh, sure,
just depending.
sure.
Like, it's hard to pinpoint what's right or wrong, because some people might only have the attention span to listen for 15, 20 minutes, and some people want to listen to 3 hours. It's really, it depends on who you ask. 6 hours too.
A cool thing I just wanted to say is with that people listening to it, like the 3-hour journey we're mentioning, it's great when somebody finds your show who hasn't heard all your episodes, and then they go back and now they've got plenty of content to dive through and catch up.
Yeah, well, I find making videos, sometimes people just want to watch for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But when you're doing a podcast, a show, which we do a lot, as has been said, I find that about right. It's like watching a program on TV, 45 minutes, an hour, something like that. But then again, if you're doing something like you're taking a trip or something, as say you're in the car, put it on through the car, you can do an hour and a half. Sometimes, depending on the topic, you get involved, an hour and a half goes by like nothing.
Kit, you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's a saying, you were just saying that sometimes that happens on Talk More Talk. If we've got a guest and we're really rolling and the conversation is great, it's kind of hard to say, our hour's up, and we got to cut this off. So, if it's...
Especially there's a lot of news too.
And then, yes, exactly, there's that, and, so it's really hard to just cut it, particularly when you're recording live.
What he said about people finding a show and then going back, that's the best part of podcasting, is that you can put all these shows up and all of a sudden a new listener, all of a sudden, oh my God, there's 200 episodes just like this. And then they start listening that way. And that's the beauty of the internet. If we don't have the internet and the streaming services and everything else, you don't have podcasting, it's just the way it works. But they find you, and then they like you, and then they listen more.
But kind of unfortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, shorts these days, video shorts. People have the attention span of like 15 seconds or less, 30 seconds. But I'm starting to make video shorts only as an advertisement kind of thing. You do it's like an ad for your channel. This is what I do. You show them something, then maybe they'll subscribe, and you watch the longer content. Shorts.
One more comment, and then we have another question. Go.
Could I have the last word?
You just have. Okay. I assume that's what you wanted to do.
Beatles.
Okay. Just about out of time. Do you want to get one more question?
Just curious your thoughts. I think there's an interesting progression from the sort of mass media to the podcast or social media we see today of sort of democratization of fandom. The fans, we can go really deep into the rabbit hole and the niche, and the fans are sort of creating content and finding community and other people to sort of share that interest. And I'm just sort of curious, any thoughts based on your experiences creating all this content that we're consuming around that.
Meaning that you're sort of defining a community?
Well, there's sort of, the fans are empowered to be creating criticism and responding and sharing, the community.
All right, let me see if I'm extracting this correctly. You have your visions. As you hear from fans, as you hear from listeners, do they help form what you're going to do?
Yeah, for me, yeah.
Yeah, don't do shows on Ringo.
I do them. Sorry, if you don't like Ringo.
I like Ringo, but we get that a lot.
Hey, on Talk More Talk, one of our biggest shows was about Ringo.
Ringo the Fourth.
Ringo the Fourth, the show Ringo the Fourth.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, our audience has given us a lot of great, feedback on what to do, suggestions. It's a huge part of what Two Legs is. They'll email us and say, what about an idea on this? And then Tom and I will talk about it and run with it. So that part of it is key for us.
You're going to try for the last word again. Go ahead.
The strange thing is, I do get feedback from a lot of listeners of my show, but instead of saying things I could do differently, the overwhelming response has been, keep doing exactly what you're doing. This is just keep doing it. You've got something here.
Yes, with social media, I mean, sometimes it can be direct, but for the most part, it's indirect. It's if I decide to post a discussion video about anything, someone could just say, oh, I really love this. I really love the way you speak. I love this perspective, blah, blah, blah. And then I know that that's what I have to keep doing because I monitor, I just see the positive comments. It's not someone saying, do another video like this, or hey, stop doing that. It's really just picking apart what they're saying. And if it gets like a rise out of people, if it gets people talking, if it gets people having constructive arguments, then you know that's what you got to keep doing.
But that's part of what the internet is about. They want you to fight more, especially Facebook, the way the algorithm is. The more you fight, the more it gets going. That's part of it. But sometimes one of the problems listening to your audience, especially online, is not everyone comments. And a lot of times,
I say most people don't comment.
most of the time, a lot of times it's the same people every week.
Sure.
So
I get hundreds of comments all the time. I've just been doing it a long time.
You have to be careful. You have to have your own vision. And yes, you should listen to some of your audience or all of it. But you got to remember, not everyone answers.
Not everybody thinks the same, obviously. You get people that love what you do. You got me through COVID. I was able to watch your content and everything. Other people like, get a life.
Sorry.
And I say, why don't you tell me where to get one?
So that would be the William Shatner Star Trek parody Saturday Night Live episode. Okay, well, I'd like to thank all of you for sharing your insights. You definitely have a life, and thank you for sharing that life with us.